Marilyn Monroe called herself a ghost. Vivien Leigh said she was imprisoned. Montgomery Clift lived 3 incompatible lives at once. These weren't metaphors. These were confessions from 12 Golden Age stars who sold their souls for fame and admitted it in their own words. The ghost nobody wanted to know. That platinum blonde hair, those parted lips, that breathy voice. Marilyn Monroe became the most recognizable woman on earth. But the pills started when she was 14. The hair dye burned her scalp for decades. And what she wrote in her private journal would reveal something far darker than Hollywood ever wanted audiences to know. Norma Jean Mortensen grew up without parents. Her mother institutionalized, her father unknown. Her childhood spent in foster homes. When she married at 16 to escape and worked in a factory during World War II, a photographer saw potential, but that natural beauty wasn't enough for studios who came calling. 20th Century Fox signed her in 1946 and immediately began erasing Norma Jean. Her light brown hair was bleached platinum blonde in treatment so harsh, the chemicals burned her scalp repeatedly for years. They changed her name. Norma Jean became Marilyn Monroe. They taught her to walk differently, talk differently, exist differently. The breathless voice that made her famous was pure construction, but the physical transformation prepared for something worse. Studio executives molded her into the dumb blonde persona. And here's what audiences never knew. Marilyn was intelligent. She read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. She studied method acting with Lee Strasberg, desperate to be taken seriously. But Hollywood wanted the body, the face, the fantasy. So she learned to play dumb, to giggle vapidly at jokes she'd already understood, to pretend confusion about things she grasped immediately. The public devoured the illusion. Marilyn became the biggest star in the world, and Norma Jean retreated further. Inside, with every photo shoot, every performance, every moment she had to be someone she wasn't. The disconnection drove her to pills, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up and perform again. Her marriages collapsed because men fell in love with Marilyn Monroe, the fantasy, and felt cheated discovering Norma Jean, the reality. Joe DiMaggio wanted a traditional wife. Arthur Miller wanted his intellectual muse, but still desired the image. Neither wanted the complicated, intelligent woman beneath the platinum hair. She kept private journals, and in those pages found after her passing, Marilyn revealed the full cost. "I'm not a real person. I'm a blonde ghost that everyone wants to touch, but nobody wants to know." Norma Jean passed away so Marilyn could live. She had become trapped inside her own image. Every public appearance required her to be on. Even in private moments, she questioned which version was real anymore. Had Marilyn consumed Norma Jean entirely? The world mourned when Marilyn Monroe passed away at 36 in 1962. But Norma Jean had been disappearing for years, slowly erased by an image that consumed everything authentic. She traded her identity for immortality, discovering too late that being a ghost meant never really existing at all. Marilyn became a ghost of her former self, but our next star's mind was being destroyed by something even more specific, and she knew exactly what was annihilating her. Forever imprisoned by Scarlett O'Hara. Vivien Leigh's bipolar episodes became so severe that Laurence Olivier would flee their home in terror. She'd stay awake for days, convinced she was Scarlett O'Hara, speaking in a southern accent, reliving Gone with the Wind as though cameras were still rolling. During depressive crashes, she'd lie motionless for weeks. But here's what destroyed Vivien's mind. It wasn't mental illness. It was the impossible prison of playing Scarlett O'Hara for 30 years. When she won the role, in 1939, thousands of women had auditioned. Vivien, a relatively unknown British actress, beat them all. The film became an instant phenomenon. Her performance earned the Academy Award. She should have been free to explore any role. Instead, the role became a prison cell. Hollywood's response was absolute. Studios only wanted Vivien to play variations of Scarlett, Southern belles, fiery beauties. When she auditioned for different roles, directors suggested she lean into her Scarlett image. The character had defined her so completely that demonstrating versatility became impossible. But Vivien had more than one performance. She'd performed Shakespeare with the old Vic. She tried desperately to escape, returning to theater, taking on Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire, winning a second Academy Award. Even that wasn't enough. Interviewers still asked about Gone with the Wind. Audiences still saw Scarlett. The pressure of living up to Scarlett while fighting mental illness created a devastating spiral. Her bipolar disorder manifested in terrifying ways. Manic episodes where she'd become inappropriately intimate, aggressive, unrecognizable, depressive phases where she couldn't leave bed for weeks. The constant demand to be Scarlett exacerbated every symptom. Her marriage to Olivier crumbled under multiple pressures, but underneath was bitter reality. In America, she was the bigger star, forever Scarlett, while he was the serious artist. The imbalance created resentment neither could articulate. Then came the physical manifestation of her torment. Vivien contracted tuberculosis, which progressively destroyed her lungs. She worked through the illness for years, hiding symptoms because admitting weakness meant admitting she couldn't be Scarlett anymore. The irony was cruel. Scarlett O'Hara had been invincible. Vivien Leigh was human, vulnerable, suffering in ways the public refused to acknowledge. In interviews during her final years, Vivien spoke with barely contained bitterness. "I'll forever be imprisoned by Scarlett O'Hara. I'm not allowed to age, to change, to be anyone else. That one role consumed my entire identity." As she aged, as tuberculosis ravaged her body, The comparison to young, unstoppable Scarlett became unbearable. She was expected to maintain that beauty, that fire while dealing with illness, psychiatric episodes, and failing lungs. Vivien Leigh passed away in 1967 at 53, tuberculosis finally consuming her. The obituaries led with Scarlett O'Hara. Even in remembrance, she couldn't escape. She had traded her identity for one perfect performance and spent the rest of her life trying to prove she was more. The effort destroyed her mind, then her body, and finally her life. Vivien was trapped by one role until it destroyed her, but our next star lost herself differently. Hollywood literally erased her face, her name, her entire heritage. They go to bed with Gilda, wake up with me. The electrolysis sessions were agony. Rita Hayworth sat while technicians inserted tiny needles into her hairline, sending electric current through each follicle to destroy it permanently. Session after session, week after week, moving her natural hairline back more than an inch to fix what Columbia Pictures executives called her ethnic problem. Those who knew her said she described it as extreme suffering, hours of pain to literally reshape her face into something Hollywood found acceptable. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in 1918, she carried her Spanish heritage in every feature. She grew up performing in her family's dance act. She was talented, beautiful, and graceful, and according to Hollywood scouts, completely unmarketable as she was. Columbia Pictures saw potential buried under problems. Harry Cohn took personal control of her transformation. First came the name. Margarita Carmen Cancino became Rita Hayworth, erasing her Spanish heritage entirely. But the name was preparation for physical violence. Studio executives decided her hairline was too low, too ethnic. The electrolysis solution took months of painful sessions, each one destroying a section of her natural hairline, pushing it back until her face no longer looked like Margarita Cancino's. Worse than the pain was watching her heritage being literally burned away, follicle by follicle. Her thick, dark hair was dyed auburn in a shade that photographed like fire in Technicolor. Maintaining it required constant, harsh chemicals that damaged her hair and scalp, but the studio demanded it. The finished product was stunning and successful beyond expectations. Rita Hayworth emerged as the love goddess. Servicemen made her photograph their favorite pinup. Her performance in Gilda in 1946 established her as one of the most desired women in the world. But success came with compounding prices. Rita had buried Margarita so deeply that reconnecting became psychologically impossible. She existed in strange limbo, not fully the Spanish woman she'd been born as, not fully the Anglo fantasy manufactured. She belonged nowhere. Her romantic life became a repeated disappointment. Men fell in love with Rita Hayworth, pursued her, won her, married her. Then came inevitable disillusionment, discovering Rita the woman was not Gilda the character. Orson Welles married her in 1943. Prince Ali Khan married her in 1949 in a ceremony that captivated the world. Singer Dick Haymes, actor Glenn Ford, each relationship followed the same tragic arc: passion, marriage, disillusionment, separation. Rita articulated the impossible trap in an interview that haunted Hollywood history. They go to bed with Gilda, they wake up with me. In one sentence, she captured the cruel paradox of being loved for an illusion. Men desired her desperately, but they desired a fantasy. The real woman, intelligent, vulnerable, yearning for genuine connection, was invisible, overshadowed by the carefully constructed image. As she aged, struggles intensified, financial problems mounted. Then came the cruelest twist. Alzheimer's began stealing her memories. The woman forced to forget Margarita Cancino now forgot everything. She forgot Rita Hayworth. She forgot the movies. She forgot Gilda. Both identities were finally completely erased. Rita Hayworth passed away in 1987. She had traded her heritage, her name, her very face for stardom. In return, she received wealth, fame, and unbearable loneliness of being loved for someone she wasn't. Rita lost herself through literal physical transformation, but our next star faced an even more devastating fracture. He had to hide who he truly was so completely. It shattered him into incompatible pieces. Living 3 different lives at once. Montgomery Clift's car left the road on May 12, 1956, slamming into a telephone pole with devastating force. The seismic impact shattered his face. The police report noted something strange: no skid marks he hadn't tried to break. Some wondered if it was the moment his fractured life finally became unbearable. When he made his film debut in Red River, audiences saw something revolutionary. A new kind of leading man, combining masculine strength with emotional vulnerability. Women adored him. Men respected his talent. And Montgomery Clift was gay, in an era when that single word could end a career, land you in jail, or get you institutionalized. This wasn't just personal preference. It was considered wrong by law. Relationships between men were not only forbidden by studio morality clauses, but considered immoral by society and against the law in most states. If rebellious women like Frances Farmer got institutionalized for being difficult, actors whose private lives violated moral codes faced worse. Discovery meant career annihilation, public humiliation, possible imprisonment. Montgomery understood these stakes from day one. His attraction to men wasn't something he could change, but it had to remain absolutely hidden. So he constructed elaborate deception, requiring constant, exhausting maintenance. Public dates with actresses like Elizabeth Taylor created the illusion of heterosexual romance. Carefully managed interviews presented him as a sensitive bachelor. Every public moment was a performance more demanding than anything on film, because the stakes were his entire life. The psychological cost manifested in destructive ways. Montgomery drank heavily, using alcohol to numb constant anxiety. Sleep became impossible without pills. He developed acute paranoia, ending relationships suddenly if they threatened to become too visible. Friends noticed his decline but couldn't understand the source. His film work took on an eerie resonance. In A Place in the Sun, he played a man trapped between two worlds. And From Here to Eternity, his character's rebellious sensitivity carried undertones of someone who didn't fit conventional masculinity. Critics praised his depth. They had no idea they were watching a man channeling his own fragmentation into performances. The car crash in 1956 nearly ended everything. Reconstruction left him with chronic pain and a face subtly different. Whether the crash was an accident or breaking point remains debated. What's certain is the physical scarring matched his internal damage. But it was to Elizabeth Taylor that Montgomery finally articulated the unbearable reality. In a conversation she later recounted, he revealed, "I'm living 3 different lives at once. The one Hollywood wants, the one I show my family, and the one that's actually mine. None of them are compatible." The admission laid bare impossible mathematics. Hollywood demanded he be a heterosexual leading man. His family required him to maintain respectability, and his authentic self existed only in shadows, in secret moments, in relationships that could never be acknowledged. There was no version of Montgomery Clift that could integrate all 3 identities. He was fractured at his core, living in permanent exile from himself. The pain accelerated his decline. The drinking intensified. His performances became erratic. By his early 40s, he looked decades older. Montgomery Clift passed away in 1966 at 45, found alone in his townhouse. Those who knew him understood he'd been in the process of passing for years, slowly consumed by the impossibility of being 3 incompatible versions of himself simultaneously. His tragedy transcended personal loss. Montgomery represented an entire generation of LGBTQ actors forced to bury their authentic selves, to live in permanent fear, to exist in psychological fragments. His confession gave voice to countless others. He had wanted to be a great actor, and he achieved that, but he'd also wanted to be himself. And Hollywood made those 2 ambitions mutually exclusive. This is the reality Hollywood worked so hard to hide. These weren't just difficult careers. They were systematic destruction of human identity. If these stories are opening your eyes to Hollywood's hidden darkness, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear gets even more devastating. We're uncovering the confessions Hollywood never wanted you to know. Montgomery's secret fractured him into incompatible pieces. But our next star faced devastation of a different kind. Tragedy struck, and Hollywood's response revealed just how cruel the system could be. My Baby was the price of success. Jean Tierney possessed what many considered the most beautiful face in Hollywood. At a war bond rally in 1943, a young woman approached for an autograph. The fan was effusive, excited. Then she said something that would destroy Jean's life. "I hope you don't mind, Miss Tierney, but I broke quarantine to come see you. I just got over German measles, but I couldn't wait." Jean signed the autograph, smiled. What else could she do? She thought nothing more of it. She was pregnant, working because the studio demanded she fulfill obligations. That brief encounter would haunt her forever. Within weeks, Jean fell ill. Doctors diagnosed German measles, rubella. For most people, it is relatively mild. For pregnant women, especially in the first trimester, it is catastrophic. The virus attacks the developing fetus with particular cruelty. Jean's doctors explained the risks while offering hope. She spent her pregnancy in absolute terror, praying for a miracle that never came. Daria Tierney was born in October 1943. The damage was immediately apparent and devastating. She had severe intellectual disabilities, preventing her from ever living independently. She was almost entirely deaf. Cataracts clouded both eyes, leaving her partially blind. She would require institutional care for life. Jean's worst fears had materialized, and it was because a selfish fan couldn't wait a few more days. The emotional devastation was absolute, but what happened next transformed personal tragedy into something darker. Jean expected support from 20th Century Fox. Instead, studio executives approached her with cold pragmatism, revealing complete inhumanity. They told her explicitly that motherhood and stardom were incompatible. They pressured her to place Daria in an institution immediately and return to work as though nothing happened. The message was clear. Her daughter was an inconvenience to be managed and hidden. There was no acknowledgement that studio demands had placed her at risk. No compassion for a mother dealing with unending grief. Just cold calculations about protecting their investment. Jean later described their attitude. "The studio told me motherhood and stardom weren't compatible. When my daughter was born disabled, they suggested institutionalization so I could keep working. They acted like she was the price I paid for. Success, and I should accept it and move on." She did place Daria in an institution. She had no choice, lacking resources to provide the intensive care required. The decision haunted her daily. The fan who caused this remained unknown, just another face in the crowd. But then came a moment designed to maximize Jean's pain. Years later, a woman approached and cheerfully reintroduced herself. She reminded Jean about breaking quarantine at that rally, apparently thinking it was a charming story. She had no idea, genuinely had no idea, that she was speaking to the woman whose daughter she had taken away any chance at a normal life. Jean stood speechless, her world collapsing. This woman, still smiling, was the reason Daria couldn't hear, couldn't see properly, couldn't think or communicate normally. This woman had taken away her daughter's entire life for an autograph, and she didn't even know. Jean said nothing at that moment, but the psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. She had been struggling with depression since Daria's birth. This revelation pushed Jean past her breaking point. She attempted to end her own life shortly after, unable to bear knowing who had caused her daughter's suffering. Jean spent time in psychiatric treatment while the studio grew impatient with her inability to work. Jean eventually recovered enough to return to acting, but she was fundamentally changed. She became an advocate for rubella awareness, using her tragedy to prevent other women from experiencing similar devastation. She spoke publicly about Daria, about the negligent fan, about the studio's callous response, turning private anguish into public warning. Jean Tierney's story reveals perhaps the cruelest aspect of Hollywood's golden age, the complete dehumanization of stars, treated as products rather than people. She had given everything, and when tragedy struck because of studio demands, they suggested she simply discard her disabled daughter and get back to work. The price of fame was paid by families, children, everyone who loved them. Jean's heartbreak reveals Hollywood's inhuman cruelty, but our next star chose a different path. She admitted she'd sacrifice anything, even her humanity, for fame. I'd step over bodies to get what I want. Joan Crawford admitted something most stars would deny. I'd step over bodies to get what I want, and I have. And she meant it literally. There were bodies, careers destroyed, friendships incinerated, co-stars she annihilated so completely they never worked again. Born Lucille Lesueur in 1905 into poverty, she clawed her way out through sheer force of will. When she broke into show business, she approached the opportunity with intensity that frightened Hollywood veterans. This was her one chance, and she would destroy anyone who stood in her way. MGM rechristened her Joan Crawford. She responded with obsessive dedication, studying acting 18 hours a day, working longer than any other contract player, learning every technical aspect of filmmaking. She exercised relentlessly, starved herself, and constructed a persona of glamorous perfection matched by internal ruthlessness that shocked even Hollywood's most cynical operators. Joan approached relationships like military campaigns. Her marriage to Douglas Fairbanks Jr. in 1929 was calculated social elevation. When that served its purpose, she divorced him and married François Tone for sophistication and theatrical credentials. Philip Terry provided wartime stability. Alfred Steele offered late-career financial security. Each husband was a chess piece. Her treatment of colleagues revealed something darker. Joan maintained friendships that benefited her and dropped those that didn't with shocking cruelty. Her rivalry with Bette Davis escalated into genuine hatred. There were stories about what she'd done to other actresses, whisper campaigns, lies told to executives, career sabotage, disguised as friendly advice. When Joan and Bette worked together on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962, crew members described the atmosphere as genuinely frightening. Two aging legends who despised each other, each trying to undermine the other. Perhaps most damning were her relationships with her adopted children, particularly Christina. Joan presented herself publicly as a devoted mother. Behind closed doors, according to Christina's memoir published after Joan's passing, the reality was brutal. Volcanic rages, rigid perfectionism designed to break rather than guide. Joan never apologized. When confronted with her ruthless reputation, she defended it with startling frankness. I'd step over bodies to get what I want, and I have. She went further, acknowledging what this pursuit cost psychologically. She admitted maintaining her position required eradicating the human parts of herself, the capacity for unconditional love, for vulnerability, for putting anyone else first. She had performed emotional surgery, systematically removing qualities that might make her weak. The result was a career spanning 5 decades and personal life ending in isolation. Joan achieved everything. She'd been a star through silent films, talkies, Technicolor, and television. She'd become a legend, an icon. But she arrived at life's end fundamentally alone. Her children wouldn't speak to her. Her marriage had ended. Her friendships were transactional. She was surrounded by employees, but devoid of genuine connection. The question that haunted Joan in her final years was whether the trade had been worth it. She had become exactly what she'd wanted, immortal through film. She had also become, by her own admission, something less than fully human. And unlike stars who hid their ruthlessness, Joan admitted what she'd done and what it cost. She owned her choices completely, which made them even more chilling. Joan chose ambition over humanity, but our next star fought the studio system, and they found a way to destroy not just her career, but her mind. The studio had me committed when I wouldn't obey. Frances Farmer was dragged from her home in 1942, screaming about studio conspiracies, and committed to a psychiatric institution. What happened over the next 6 years would stand as one of Hollywood's most disturbing horror stories, and Frances would claim it was punishment for refusing to be Paramount's obedient star. She'd been troubled from the beginning. Intelligent and outspoken from childhood, Frances won a high school writing contest with an essay defending atheism that caused scandal. At university, she developed radical political views. When she arrived in Hollywood, she brought that same independence. Paramount signed her and initially celebrated her talent. But Frances chafed under studio control in ways that made her dangerous. She hated publicity obligations, manufactured romances, studio control over her personal life. She spoke her mind in interviews, openly criticizing the studio system. She was labeled difficult, the kiss of career annihilation. By 1942, her conflicts with Paramount had escalated. Her contract wasn't renewed. Her personal life deteriorated. Alcoholism, run-ins with police, headlines about bar fights. Then came the commitment. What they did to Frances wasn't treatment. It was systematic destruction disguised as therapy. She endured insulin shock therapy, where massive insulin doses induced comas with violent seizures. The theory was shocking. The brain would reset problematic behavior. The reality was extreme suffering causing memory loss and permanent cognitive damage. They subjected her to hydrotherapy, strapping her naked into bathtubs filled with ice water for 6 to 8 hours while staff ignored her screaming. The cold penetrated so deeply, she'd lose feeling in her extremities. This was supposed to calm manic episodes. It traumatized patients into submission. Electroshock therapy was administered repeatedly, powerful currents through her brain causing violent seizures. Each session erased memories, created confusion, damaged cognitive function incrementally. Then, in 1948, came the transorbital lobotomy. Doctors held her down, administered shock to render her briefly unconscious. Then, while she was dazed, they hammered an instrument resembling an ice pick through the thin bone behind her eye socket, penetrating her frontal lobe. They swept it back and forth, destroying brain tissue randomly, permanently altering her personality. The procedure took less than 10 minutes. The damage was irreversible. When Frances emerged in the 1950s, she was fundamentally different. The brilliant, defiant woman who challenged Hollywood was gone, replaced by someone quieter, more subdued, damaged in ways both visible and invisible. She tried to return to acting but found no opportunities. Decades later, Frances gave testimony. That remains controversial. The studio had me committed when I wouldn't obey. What they did to me in that place, the treatments, the humiliation, it wasn't about mental health. It was punishment for refusing to be their puppet. Her accusations were controversial. Some dismissed them as paranoid delusions. Others pointed out studios wielded enormous power. Frances couldn't prove direct studio involvement, but the pattern was damning. Rebellious actress gets labeled difficult, her career destroyed, then her body and mind destroyed through institutional treatment, emerging broken and docile. Whether Paramount directly orchestrated it or not, the message Hollywood received was unmistakable. Defy the system and face consequences more terrifying than career annihilation. Frances Farmer passed away in 1970, having spent final years working as a hotel clerk, occasionally speaking about her experiences when anyone would listen. Her courage in giving testimony about what had been done gave voice to the terrifying power Hollywood wielded over stars who refused to conform. Which of these revelations has shocked you most? Did you know Jean Tierney's fan caused her daughter's disabilities? Did you understand what they did to Frances Farmer? What golden age Hollywood topics should we uncover next? The hidden scandals, the stars who fought back, the executives who wielded this power. Share your thoughts in the comments. Frances was punished and destroyed for defiance, but our next star made a different choice. She admitted she traded authentic love for calculated publicity, and by the end, she realized what that cost. I married for headlines, not love. Lana Turner earned her nickname, the Sweater Girl. Married 7 times for headlines, and admitted late in life that only one relationship had been real, and it ended in violence and tragedy. What audiences never understood was that 6 of those 7 marriages were business transactions carefully calculated to keep her name in papers while her capacity for genuine intimacy atrophied. Discovered as a teenager at a Hollywood soda fountain, the classic story studios loved. MGM signed her and built her into a major star, defining her image around beauty and sensuality. But while her screen image was all romantic longing, Lana approached her personal life with cold pragmatism. Her first marriage to bandleader Artie Shaw lasted 4 months, but brought her cultural sophistication. Marriage to restaurateur Steve Crane came next. Time to her pregnancy, necessary when unwed motherhood could destroy a career. Her marriage to millionaire Bob Topping brought wealth and high society connections. Actor Lex Barker gave her the Hollywood power couple image. Rancher Fred May represented return to normal life that the press ate up. Her marriage brought publicity, headlines, and a calculated boost to her profile. Through 7 husbands over 3 decades, Lana remained one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The marriages generated constant press coverage. Each wedding was photographed extensively. Each divorce was covered like a national tragedy. The public followed her romantic saga as avidly as her movies. But in later years, Lana revealed something that recontextualized her entire life. She admitted with bitter frankness that most marriages had been strategic decisions rather than emotional commitments. I married for headlines, not love. Every marriage was a career move. She went further, acknowledging the emptiness. The only honest relationship I had ended in scandal. She was referring to Johnny Stompanato, a man with documented connections to organized crime, who became involved with Lana in 1957. Unlike her 7 husbands, Stompanato wasn't chosen for career advancement. He was dangerous, possibly abusive, exactly wrong for her public image. But he was real, and that relationship ended in horror on April 4th, 1958. Lana's Beverly Hills home erupted in a violent argument that evening. Stompanato was enraged, possibly about Lana's refusal to take him to the Academy Awards. Witnesses reported hearing his shouting through walls, threats against Lana, against her daughter, against her career. He'd threatened to cut her face, to destroy her beauty. 14-year-old Cheryl Crane was in the house, terrified. In the kitchen, she grabbed a knife, a 9-inch carving knife. She went to her mother's bedroom where the argument had reached fever pitch. The door opened, Stompanato emerged, still threatening, and Cheryl, acting on instinct and terror, stabbed upward. The knife penetrated between his ribs, piercing his aorta. He collapsed within seconds. By the time police arrived, Johnny Stompanato had already passed away, and Cheryl was in shock. The coroner's jury ruled justifiable protection, self-defense by a teenage girl against a violent man. Cheryl was not charged, but the psychological damage was irreversible. She had ended a life at 14. For Lana, the tragedy crystallized something she'd been avoiding. This relationship, the one time she'd followed her heart rather than career calculations, had ended with violence, the loss of a life. Her daughter traumatized, and every detail exposed in courtroom testimony. Looking back over 7 calculated marriages and 1 tragic relationship, Lana articulated what she'd traded. I never got to experience real love, the kind where someone knows you completely and loves you anyway. Every man I married fell for Lana Turner, the star. I don't know if anyone ever loved me. She had been desired by countless men, married 7 times, lived a life that looked like endless romance, but she'd turned relationships into publicity opportunities so habitually that she'd never developed genuine connection. The one time she'd tried to follow emotion rather than calculation, it had ended in the worst way imaginable. Lana traded love for headlines, but our next star made an even more fundamental sacrifice. He buried his authentic self so completely that even his closest friends never knew the real man. I've been playing a character my whole life. Clark Gable held his newborn son in March 1961, months after his own passing. But before he'd passed away, in his final weeks, he'd confessed something to his wife Kay that haunted her. I don't know how to be a father. I've never been taught how to be real. I don't even know who I am under all this. For 3 decades, Clark Gable's name was synonymous with masculinity itself. His performance as Rhett Butler established him as the definitive leading man. He was called the King of Hollywood, and according to Clark himself, almost none of it was real. Born William Clark Gable in Ohio in 1901, he grew up without advantages. His mother passed away when he was an infant. His father was an oil driller who struggled financially and emotionally. When Hollywood came calling in the early 1930s, MGM saw potential buried under problems. His teeth were damaged, ultimately replaced with complete dentures by his mid-20s, a secret he guarded obsessively. His ears stuck out prominently. His entire persona required construction from nothing. MGM molded him into an image of masculine confidence, the wisecracking charm, the easy authority, the confident presence. None of it came naturally. All of it was taught, rehearsed, performed until habitual. The public loved the character MGM created. Clark Gable became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He embodied a very specific vision of American masculinity. Rhett Butler was the perfect synthesis of this manufactured image. But privately, those close to him noticed contradictions. Clark drank heavily. He had deep insecurities, obsessive about his ears, profoundly self-conscious about his dentures, uncertain about his acting ability despite decades of success. His final marriage to Kay Williams in 1955 seemed to bring him peace. She was genuinely devoted, not impressed by his stardom, seemingly accepting of whoever he actually was. It was to Kay that Clark finally began articulating something he'd felt for decades. I've been playing a character my whole life, he confessed in a conversation she later recounted. Clark Gable doesn't exist. He's a studio invention. I don't know who I would have been if I'd been allowed to find out. He had lived his entire adult life, from mid-20s until late 50s. As a character MGM created, that character had been so thoroughly maintained for so many decades that the real man underneath never got to develop. Clark Gable, the icon, had consumed William Clark Gable, the human being. He elaborated in other conversations, describing the performance that never stopped. Every public appearance required him to be on, to embody the confident masculinity audiences expected. The line between performance and reality had blurred so completely that he no longer knew where one ended and the other began. When Kay told him she was pregnant late in 1960, Clark broke down in a way she'd never seen. "How do I do this?" he asked, genuinely panicked. "I've never been taught how to be real. I only know how to perform." The tragedy was existential. A man who'd lived his entire adult life, achieved extraordinary success, been loved by millions, but never got to discover who he actually was. Clark Gable passed away in November 1960 of a heart attack at 59, just days after completing his final film. Kay was 7 months pregnant with their son, born in March and named John Clark Gable. The world mourned the king of Hollywood. But Clark's late-life confessions add profound melancholy to his legacy. He had been enormously successful, beloved. He had also spent his entire adult life as a character someone else created, never getting the chance to discover his authentic self, passing before meeting the son who might have finally given him reason to figure out who he really was. Clark spent his entire life as a character he never chose, but our final star made a patriotic sacrifice that Hollywood repaid with betrayal. I cut my hair and Hollywood cut me. Veronica Lake was working as a barmaid in a Manhattan dive bar in 1962 when a businessman recognized her face. He asked if she was really Veronica Lake, the movie star. She looked at him with barely concealed bitterness and said yes. He asked what happened. She said, "I cut my hair and Hollywood cut me." That single sentence contained the entire tragedy of her career. A woman reduced to a hairstyle, then destroyed when that hairstyle disappeared. But the full story reveals something even more devastating about Hollywood's values and the price of patriotism in an industry that cared only about profit. That peekaboo hairstyle, blonde waves falling across one eye, had made her more than famous in the early 1940s. It made her iconic. Women across America copied it religiously. Soldiers carried her photos into battle. Fashion magazines ran features on the Lake look. Department stores sold Veronica Lake wigs. The hairstyle became a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of glamorous mystique that defined an entire era. Paramount understood that Veronica Lake wasn't just an actress. She was a brand built entirely around a distinctive hairstyle. Studio executives calculated her worth in photographs sold, magazine covers featuring that cascading blonde wave, the millions of women who'd pay to achieve the look. She was marketable specifically because she was visually distinctive in ways that could be photographed, reproduced, sold. Born Constance Frances Marie Ockelman in 1922 in Brooklyn, she was renamed Veronica Lake by studio executives who understood that Constance Ockelman would never sell the fantasy they were manufacturing. They put her in film noir thrillers where her distinctive look created instant visual impact. The Glass Key, This Gun for Hire, The Blue Dahlia. In each film, that hair suggested secrets, danger lurking beneath beauty, a mysterious allure that photographers captured magnificently. The peekaboo style became inseparable from her identity. Cinematographers lit it specially. Costume designers built wardrobes around it. Directors instructed her to toss it, touch it, let it fall across her face at strategic moments. She wasn't just wearing a hairstyle, she was performing it, making it a character in every scene. By 1943, America was deep into World War II, with women working in factories in unprecedented numbers, building planes, assembling munitions, operating heavy machinery. Rosie the Riveter represented this massive shift in female employment, but it came with serious dangers nobody had anticipated. Factory machinery could catch loose hair and drag workers into mechanisms with horrifying results. The loose, flowing hairstyles popular among women, particularly the peekaboo style Veronica had made fashionable, were proving catastrophic in industrial settings. Women were being seriously injured, sometimes losing their lives because their long hair, styled in imitation of their favorite movie star, was getting caught in equipment, pulled into gears, dragged into assembly mechanisms. Government officials tracking workplace safety identified the problem and needed a solution. They needed women to tie back their hair, to abandon the glamorous styles that were literally ending lives. But women weren't listening to safety pamphlets. They were listening to Hollywood. The government approached Veronica with what they presented as a patriotic request: cut your hair and film a public safety campaign showing women that shorter, practical hairstyles could still be beautiful. They framed it as her duty, her contribution to the war effort. Veronica genuinely wanting to support the war effort and wanting to. Horrified that her signature look was inadvertently harming women, agreed without hesitation. She cut her famous hair and filmed the safety campaign, appearing in newsreels and public service announcements with shorter, pinned-back hair, explaining to American women that factory safety required practical choices. She smiled for the cameras, played her part as the patriotic star willing to sacrifice glamour for the greater good. The public responded positively. The campaign was remarkably effective. Factory injuries decreased dramatically. Government officials credited Veronica's sacrifice with saving lives. Women who'd ignored safety regulations listened to their movie star, finally understanding that their hair posed genuine danger. Veronica had done something genuinely heroic, using her platform to prevent tragedy. But Hollywood's response was immediate, cold, and absolutely merciless. Paramount executives suddenly lost all interest in their former star. Without the peekaboo hair, she looked like dozens of other blonde actresses flooding the market. The distinctive identifier that made her special, that made her worth the investment, was gone. She'd destroyed her own brand. Scripts stopped arriving. Projects she'd been promised evaporated. Phone calls went unreturned. Veronica pleaded with studio executives, explaining she'd cut her hair for patriotic reasons, that it would grow back, that she was still the same talented actress. They responded with brutal honesty. She wasn't the same. She was Veronica Lake without the Lake look. She was worthless to them now. They'd built her entirely around that hairstyle, and without it, she had nothing they wanted. Her career collapsed with shocking speed. By the late 1940s, barely 5 years after cutting her hair patriotically, she was struggling to find any work at all. The few roles she was offered were minor, forgettable parts in B-movies. Directors told her bluntly that audiences expected the peekaboo hair, and without it, she failed to deliver the fantasy they'd paid to see. Her personal life crumbled under the pressure. Her marriages failed under financial strain and the psychological devastation of watching her career disintegrate. She descended into alcoholism, drinking to numb the rage and betrayal. The industry that had built her career around a hairstyle that had made millions from her image discarded her the instant that hairstyle disappeared, even though she'd sacrificed it to save lives. The contrast with male stars was stark and infuriating. Jimmy Stewart had served as a bomber pilot. Clark Gable had flown combat missions. They returned to Hollywood as heroes, their careers waiting, their box office appeal enhanced by their service. Studios celebrated their patriotism, featured it in publicity materials, and used it to sell tickets. Veronica had made a sacrifice too, giving up the single thing that made her career possible to prevent women from losing their lives in factories. But she received no loyalty, no gratitude, no acknowledgement that she'd done something brave. Hollywood had valued her only for a hairstyle, and her patriotic sacrifice meant nothing compared to their lost profits from the Veronica Lake brand. Her later years were marked by desperate struggle, working as a sales clerk in department stores, serving drinks in bars, waiting tables in restaurants where former fans sometimes recognized her and asked what happened. The alcoholism worsened, damaging her health, her relationships with her children, her ability to maintain even minimal employment. She had children from various relationships, struggled to support them, and sometimes relied on welfare when work disappeared entirely. The woman who'd been a major star, whose image had sold millions of magazines, who'd sacrificed her career to save lives, ended up forgotten and broke, living in residential hotels, occasionally giving bitter interviews to journalists who'd tracked her down for "where are they now" stories. Veronica Lake passed away in 1973 at 50 in a Burlington, Vermont hospital, her body worn down by years of alcoholism and poverty, alone except for medical staff who had no idea they were attending to someone who'd once been famous. Obituaries mentioned the peekaboo hairstyle before her acting talent, before her films, before her patriotic sacrifice, proving that even in remembrance, she couldn't escape being reduced to that one physical attribute. I became beautiful and lost everything real. Hedy Lamarr sat in her Los Angeles apartment in the 1970s, virtually penniless despite having been called the most beautiful woman in the world. When an interviewer asked what happened to her fortune, her film career, her legendary status, she gave an answer that cut to Hollywood's cruelest paradox. I became beautiful and lost everything real. My face was my prison, my brain was my secret shame. Born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna in 1914, she possessed extraordinary beauty and equally extraordinary intelligence. At 19, she married Fritz Mandl, one of Europe's wealthiest arms manufacturers. During dinner parties with scientists and military officials, Hedwig absorbed conversations about weapons technology, torpedo guidance systems, and radio frequencies. Her mind cataloged everything. When she escaped that marriage and fled to America, MGM's Louis B. Mayer saw only one thing worth developing, that face. He rechristened her Hedy Lamarr and built her career entirely around her exotic beauty. They put her in films where she looked ravishing and said very little. Directors told her to think less and pose more, but Hedy's mind never stopped working. During World War II, while Hollywood treated her as decorative furniture, she was developing a frequency hopping system for torpedo guidance that would prevent enemy jamming. She partnered with composer George Antheil, and together they created technology decades ahead of its time. They patented it in 1942 and offered it freely to the U.S. Navy to help the war effort. The Navy dismissed it. Some historians suggest they couldn't take seriously an invention from a beautiful actress. The technology sat unused for decades, only to become the foundation for modern Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS systems. Hedy had invented fundamental technology that would reshape human communication, and nobody cared because they were too distracted by her cheekbones. Hollywood's response to her intelligence was worse than dismissal. It was active suppression. When she tried to discuss her inventions in interviews, publicists redirected conversations to her beauty routine. When she suggested more substantial roles, directors reminded her that audiences wanted to look at her, not listen to her. Studio executives made it clear her brain was unmarketable, even threatening. Beauty was her only acceptable currency. The psychological toll manifested in destructive patterns. Hedy married 6 times, each relationship following similar trajectories. Men attracted to her beauty, then threatened by her intelligence, ultimately unable to reconcile the two. She struggled with shoplifting in later years, arrested multiple times for stealing items she could afford. Psychologists suggested it was about control, about taking something when everything else had been taken from her. Her film career evaporated by the 1950s. Her beauty began to fade, the only thing Hollywood had valued. The inventions that should have made her wealthy and celebrated remained unrecognized. She underwent plastic surgery repeatedly, trying to maintain the face that had been both her fortune and her curse. each procedure making her look less like herself. By her final decades, Hedy lived in near isolation, making bitter phone calls to journalists who would listen. In one devastating interview, she articulated the impossible trap. I became beautiful and lost everything real. Hollywood wanted a face, not a mind. The world got both, but only valued one. I gave them technology that changed civilization, and they gave me nothing but compliments on my appearance. The cruelest irony came in 1997. Technology organizations finally recognized her frequency-hopping patent as foundational to modern wireless communications. They wanted to honor her at a ceremony. Hedy, then 83 and living in seclusion in Florida, refused to appear. She'd spent too many decades being stared at. She sent her son to accept the award. Hedy Lamarr passed away in January 2000, just weeks after that belated recognition. Obituaries led with her beauty and film career before mentioning, almost as afterthought, that she'd invented technology, enabling the smartphone on which you might be reading about her. She had possessed both extraordinary beauty and extraordinary genius, and Hollywood's golden age made those two attributes mutually exclusive. She'd traded being taken seriously for being beautiful, discovering too late that she'd never been given the choice. The trade had been made for her the moment someone saw that face and decided her mind didn't matter. Hedy lost herself by being too beautiful to be taken seriously. But our next star faced a different devastation. He gave Hollywood everything, and they repaid him with systematic erasure. They erased me from my own success. When Hattie McDaniel passed away in 1952, her final wish was to be buried in Hollywood Forever Cemetery alongside other film legends. The cemetery refused. Their policy explicitly prohibited black burials. The woman who'd broken barriers, who'd won an Academy Award, who'd opened doors that had been bolted shut. She couldn't be buried near the white stars she'd worked beside. It took 47 years before a memorial was finally placed there in 1999. But that final insult was just the last in decades of systematic erasure that began the moment she achieved her greatest triumph. February 29, 1940, Hattie McDaniel walked onto the stage at the Ambassador Hotel and became the first African-American to win an Academy Award. Her performance as Mammy in Gone with the Wind had earned her the Best Supporting Actress Oscar. It should have been an unqualified triumph. Instead, it revealed how completely Hollywood's racism could poison even moments of recognition. She hadn't been allowed to sit with her Gone with the Wind castmates at the ceremony. The hotel was segregated. She sat at a small table in the back against the wall, in a section reserved for black attendees. When her name was called, she had to navigate through a white audience to reach the stage. Her acceptance speech, now largely forgotten, thanked the studio that had fought to allow her to attend at all. The victory should have opened Hollywood to Hattie. Instead, it confirmed her in roles that made white audiences comfortable. Studios only wanted her to play maids, mammies, domestics. Always subservient, always comic relief, never fully human. She was talented enough to win the industry's highest honor, but not respected enough to play anything beyond stereotypes. The NAACP criticized her for accepting demeaning roles, for perpetuating stereotypes. Hattie's response cut to an impossible choice. I'd rather play a maid than be one. She understood the economic reality. These roles paid better than anything else available to black women in that era. Refusing them meant poverty, not principle. But the cost was compounding. Every role reinforced the same limited image. Hattie possessed remarkable range. She was a talented singer, a gifted comedian, and a serious dramatic actress. None of that mattered. Hollywood had decided what a black woman could be on screen, and Hattie's Oscar changed nothing. Her personal life faced scrutiny white stars never experienced. Her marriages were dissected as evidence of moral failing. Her success made white colleagues uncomfortable. She earned more than many black professionals of her era, but she couldn't live in certain neighborhoods, eat in certain restaurants, or stay in certain hotels. Success hadn't bought her equality. The final betrayal came after her passing. When television began showing Gone with the Wind, Southern stations cut Hattie's scenes. Her Oscar-winning performance, the very reason the film had won so many Academy Awards, was literally edited out because white Southern audiences didn't want to see black actors in their living rooms. Film historians later recognized that Hattie's performance was far more nuanced than the script. She'd found ways to suggest intelligence, dignity, and strength within a role designed to be one-dimensional. She'd subverted stereotypes even while being forced to perform them, but that subtlety was lost on audiences who saw only what they expected to see. In later years, Hattie spoke with carefully controlled bitterness about her experience. They erased me from my own success. I won the award, but they wouldn't let me sit with my castmates. I opened the door, but they wouldn't let me walk through it. I made history, but they kept rewriting it without me in it. When she passed away of breast cancer at 57, the industry praised her as a pioneer, but they'd never treated her as one during her life. They'd used her talent, taken credit for her breakthrough, and then continued business exactly as before, keeping black actors in servicing roles, denying them complexity, erasing them when convenient. Hattie McDaniel's tragedy wasn't that she failed, it's that she succeeded brilliantly, and Hollywood still found ways to diminish, limit, and ultimately erase her. She'd sold everything for a chance at recognition, achieved that recognition, and discovered it meant nothing if the system itself refused to change. 12 stars. 12 devastating confessions, 12 different ways of selling a soul for fame. Marilyn became a ghost, trapped between Norma Jean and the blonde fantasy. Vivien found herself imprisoned by Scarlett O'Hara until it destroyed her mind and body. Rita had her heritage literally erased, then discovered men only wanted the manufactured illusion. Montgomery fractured into 3 incompatible lives, slowly fading away from that psychological impossibility. Jean faced unimaginable tragedy and was told her disabled daughter was simply the price of success. Joan admitted she'd stepped over bodies and eradicated her humanity to reach the top. Frances fought the studio system and was institutionalized, her brilliant mind deliberately destroyed as punishment and warning. Lana traded authentic love for calculated publicity marriages, realizing too late she'd spent decades performing romance while never experiencing it. Clark lived his entire life as a character he never chose, passing away without discovering who he might have been. And Veronica made a patriotic sacrifice to save women's lives, and Hollywood repaid her by discarding her completely. Hedy had her genius dismissed because beauty and brains were deemed incompatible, spending decades in obscurity while her inventions changed the world. And Hattie broke barriers and won the highest honor, only to be erased from her own success and denied even burial among her peers. Each of these stars, in their own haunting words, revealed truths about Hollywood's golden age that shatter the carefully constructed mythology. Behind the glamorous premieres lay a system that treated human beings as commodities to be manufactured, controlled, and discarded. A system that demanded impossible sacrifices. Chemical dependencies forced on teenagers, identities systematically erased, heritage burned away, authentic selves buried so deeply they could never be recovered. These weren't just difficult careers, they were systematic. Destruction of human identity, forced performances that never stopped, punishments disguised as treatments, and calculated dehumanization of people who had the misfortune to be beautiful and talented enough for Hollywood to want them. But in their courage to speak the truth, these 12 legends gave us something more valuable than any movie role. They gave us honesty about what those performances cost. They pulled back the curtain and showed us what those perfect images required, not just in career terms, but in fundamentally human terms. Lost identities, broken psyches, sacrificed children, eradicated humanity, lives ending too young, too damaged, too alone. We remember them now, not just for their brilliant performances, though those remain powerful. We remember them for their bravery in revealing what those performances cost, for Marilyn's journal entries about being a ghost, for Vivien's admission of being imprisoned, for Rita's heartbreaking confession about Gilda, for Montgomery's description of living 3 incompatible lives, for Jean's revelation about studio cruelty, for Joan's brutal honesty about stepping over bodies, for Frances's testimony about institutional extreme suffering, for Lana's admission of trading authentic love for headlines, for Clark's realization he'd been a manufactured character, for Veronica's bitter wisdom about being valued only for hair, for Hedy's bitter realization about being beautiful and losing everything real, for Hattie's painful truth about being erased from her own success. These confessions fundamentally changed how we understand Hollywood's golden age. They revealed that the Dream Factory's primary product wasn't entertainment. It was the systematic conversion of complete human beings into profitable images, regardless of what that conversion destroyed. If you want to continue exploring the hidden truths behind Hollywood's golden age, hit the like button and share it. The real stories behind the perfect images, the human costs behind the manufactured glamour. We're committed to uncovering them. We're honoring these legends not just for what they gave us on screen, but for who they really were behind it, what they really sacrificed, what they tried to tell us when they finally found courage to speak the truth. Because they deserve to be remembered as complete human beings with complex lives, not just as the characters studios forced them to play. These stars sold their souls for our entertainment, gave up everything authentic so we could have perfect images to worship. The very least we can do is remember their truth, honor their courage in speaking it, and never forget what Hollywood's golden age really cost the people who made it golden. Thank you for watching Golden Age Files, for listening, and for caring about the real people behind the icons. Their confessions matter. Their truth matters. They matter, not just as performers, but as human beings who paid prices we're only now beginning to fully understand.